ONA LA Times Meetup. If you're tweeting this, ONA LAT hashtag. Welcome. This is kind of new ground for us. The LA Times is happy to host this event to get together more digital journalists in a room in this town than we've seen in a while. And I just welcome you, and haven't prepared any remarks, so I'm going to turn it over to Julie, who perhaps has prepared.
Yeah, there's this idea it's going to get better from here, but you might be disappointed. Thank you guys so much for coming. I have no idea who you all are, and that's so exciting. We wanted to start doing more of these types of things to get people together with wine and snacks and some information. So we hope to keep doing these things, and actually Robert is going to talk about that.
Hello, I'm Robert Hernandez. My Twitter handle is webjournalist. Some people know me from that. Stand over here by the screen. Kim and I started ONA LA about 2 years ago or so. I'm a professor at USC. I moved back to LA about 3 years ago, and I wanted to meet other web nerds. And my virtual office wife and I met. And since then, we've been trying to get people together to kind of connect and nerd out and support each other. And normally, it tends to be with like 48 hours notice at the Redwood. We haven't seen each other in a while, so we meet and drink. And thanks to Julie, we have this formal presentation or programming that we hope to do every couple of months. We want to do it more, the formal sit-down learning, mind exchange every couple of months, and then some social meetup every other month or something like that. It's great to see so many folks. I know a chunk of you are from the LA Times, and some new folks I don't know as well. Hope that this becomes a more routine thing because it's better. Journalism is better. The community is better served when we kind of share our knowledge and experience and be nerds together. Thank you for coming.
Hi, I'm Kim. I am Robert's virtual office spouse. And my only job is to tell you that if your newsroom or if you have ideas on what we should do for this programming, we are willingly accepting them. Just find one of us before or after the program and pitch your idea, or if you have a cool bar we should go to. And also become a member of ONA because it's kind of awesome.
Who is a member of ONA? I'm on the board for the national. ONA, if you don't know, tends to be DC focused, or historically it's been East Coast focused. I got elected onto the board almost 2 years ago. I'm up for re-election if I decide to run again this year. But one of the things that I wanted to do when I was on the board was to make sure West Coast was represented in some form. But we need members to participate. Outside of a great conference, there's other things like this to kind of justify your membership, but at the very least, as an ONA person, it's this group that is growing. I think it's the largest international web journalism, online journalism organization, and it's just growing and getting better, but only made better through its members, so please consider joining. I think it's like $75 or something. Come on.
Please.
Martin's gonna introduce the wonderful Data Desk people, but if everyone could give Martin a hand because he did a great job getting all this together. Thank you.
Without any further ado whatsoever, Megan Garvey is our she's somehow attached to the data desk. Well, no one's really sure, but she'll tell you more about it.
She provides the alcohol.
I do that, which is probably why anyone listens to me at all. They've pointed that out to me. So I'm Megan Garvey, and I've been at the LA Times since 1998. I started out as a very traditional print journalist, and I can't even remember the first time I saw our website. And then a few years ago, I proposed an idea to do a database of California's war dead, so the men and women who'd been killed in the wars in California. And at the time, I'd worked with Doug Smith, who's sitting. Doug, raise your hand. There he is. I had worked with Doug Smith on some data-oriented projects in the past, but at the time there was really no way to publish most of what we did online. So a lot of work went into stuff that ended up as print graphics or informed stories, but was never really made accessible to the public. So I went to Doug and I said, I have this idea. And he said, 2 months ago I would have said, great idea, no way, we can't do it. But we just hired someone named Ben Welsh, and I think you should meet him. So that was the beginning of, I don't know what it is, but a beautiful friendship. So the data desk here is really not, it's funny because a lot of people think of it as an official thing, but really what it is a group of people from different sections of the paper who've kind of banded together. I don't know if it's on a lifeboat or a ship or a raft or, I don't know, a parachute. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but yes, well, only Doug, some kind of motorcycle. But the nice thing about that is that we work together by choice, and so it's been a lot of fun. And we have a weekly meeting we call Show and Tell, where we often argue and fight with each other, but at the end of the day come up with good ideas. And Ben is going to come up and talk more about what it is that we actually do and what the data desk is. And then we're going to take a look at a project that actually was born out of a lot of fighting and arguing and discussing. So Ben, come on up.
Hello. Okay. So does this work when I stand this far away? Can everybody hear me? Okay, good. My name's Ben Welsh. I worked at the LA Times, and I do this stuff like Megan said. And our little band of people has been together for a few years, and we've put together some stuff, and I'm going to run you through kind of what we do and our work and some examples of that, and then hand it off to Anthony to get more specific, okay? So I'm going to go through a lot of stuff really fast, and if there's anything you have questions about or you want to know more about, just raise your hand or say, hey, Ben, or whatever, because like this is informal enough that we can stop and have a conversation. At least I hope so, okay? So feel free when the time comes. So the name of my talk is What is a Data Desk? And I'm going to walk you through kind of what we do. If you want to check out the slides later, they're at this URL here at the bottom, which is lat.ms/whoisDataDesk. Okay, so like Megan said, the Data Desk is an informal team of reporters and programmers here in downtown LA at the LA Times. Emphasis on team. And what we do basically in like a really oversimplified way is we turn databases into news, though in some cases news is into databases, but that's like a whole other thing. But usually we turn databases into news. So like an example would be the California War Dead database that Megan talked about, where there's a record for every casualty, and then all those go, every one of those casualties gets its own page on the internet, and you sort of turn the database into something on a news website that is different from a story, right? Other examples we've done that are more notorious include the rating of how well every teacher at LAUSD improves the test scores of their students. Every person who's on the Hollywood Walk of Fame would be another example too. This is where you build the database that is sort of news in its way. Right? That means that we write code, right? Like real code. We don't just talk about it, we do it, and we do it all day, right? And I like to write a lot of Django. That's my favorite, and we do a lot of our projects in Django, which is a Python framework that makes it easier to build websites. So it's the Python programming language. It's all these handy shortcuts that make doing stuff a lot easier, right? And this is an example of a stack that you would use to put out a Python website. That actually a lot of our sites kind of work a little bit like this. But that's not all that we use, right? There's a lot of other technologies that we use. There's people different from me who have different opinions and use different software, like Doug, who uses a lot of SAS, though I'm trying to win him over gradually. And there's other projects that you work on where certain tools are better than other tools, right? And so these are just some examples of different technologies we use. I'm sort of I'm showing my age with the DHTML reference, right? Is anyone here old enough to remember that, right? Yes. So right. I like to remind the younger developers, the internet had buzzwords before you were born, right? And anyway, but we also still, can write in English. We didn't lose that when we became computer programmers. I know some people think that, or that like the two things don't go together, but that's not true at all. We remain the people we were before we learned to program, right? And these are some examples of some front page stories that have come out of our work, right? And so now here we go through it. One thing we do, we make a lot of maps, right? That's the globe lobby you've just seen. I call it Art Deco Data Viz, right? In a certain sense. But we have a site where we map out the most recent crimes in the city of Los Angeles by neighborhood. Ken built a beautiful site to show every homicide in LA County over the last, 6 years? Something like that. And Malloy and Sarah Ardolani do a ton of awesome work to keep that up to date. We do a lot of other data by neighborhood. This is the census. This is every marijuana dispensary in Los Angeles, right? And we're putting out a lot of maps like this. Yeah, I know. This is not minimal, right? This is whatever the opposite of minimal is. And this is a very recent map I'm geeked about because this is one that Ken did to coincide with the LA riots with a lot of research from Malloy that shows everyone who died during the LA riots. And one, that's really interesting in itself, but one little geeky thing that maybe some users wouldn't notice is this is the first LA Times map that has custom map tiles. Doesn't rely on Google Maps for its service. Ken has done a lot of awesome work using OpenStreetMap and TileMill to get us on the path to escape from Google Maps, right? And so this was our Sputnik. So besides maps, we also do investigations, right? A lot of data work that people think of as data journalism or as this brand new web thing that never existed before because big data is a buzzword now. It isn't true. I mean, computer-assisted reporting is a geeky term, but it's been around for 25 years, and people like Doug and Sandy and Malloy, who are in this room, have used technical skills to do investigations for literally decades, and we still do that, right? So a recent example is Malloy and Ken worked on a story about all those people who then died in the riots and the cases that are still open, right? That's a recent one. Last year we did a big investigation about autism in California and across the country that included a lot of data analysis done by Doug and Sandy Poindexter, who I don't think is here. But that's really good stuff. If you haven't seen it, that's at latimes.com/autism. I'd recommend the whole package. And then, when Occupy hit last year, I was able to use some data to do a quickie census of the people who were arrested, right? So we still do a lot of these classic things that have to do with data analysis and investigations, right? We also train robot reporters. That's another thing that we do, right? So what does that mean, right? Well, so for instance, this is a blog post from the Homicide Report, right, which is a site that Ken built and is staffed by some people here at the Times, where we write a blog post for every person who is killed in Los Angeles County, right? We're the only ones who do this. Now, that's a lot of work, and we can't staff it. But one way to make it less work is to automate some of the easy stuff. So as soon as the spreadsheet comes in from the corner every Monday, Malloy, right, feeds it into the system. And the system, just based on the basic data fields that are in the spreadsheet, the age of the person, their race, their name, the location of where they died, is there anything else that's it? How they died, like they were stabbed or shot. Ken has written some code that will take those rows and fields from the spreadsheet and write the first paragraph to every story. So before any human has to do any work, well, barring Malloy, right? Right, Malloy's going by pseudonym tonight, I'm sorry. That initial paragraph is automatically written with no human intervention. And that's not all we do, but it's the bare minimum, right? So we have something up as soon as possible. And then if or when we're able to assign more resources to cover a homicide, that person can then write through that and add more material onto the post, right? Which in this case was Robert Lopez, who was in the room but had to leave, right? And we take that approach to a lot of different things. Here's a blog post that appears a couple times a week, every time new crime data is fed to us by the LAPD, where we have an algorithm that goes through it, identifies the neighborhoods that are having unusually high amount of crime, and writes this post and makes this map and does all this with no human work whatsoever, right? We have pages for all these neighborhoods about crime, and all this text is automatically written by algorithm. And the example I think is the coolest is one that Ken did, where he has a computer application that sits on top of the USGS's database and notification system, and every time an earthquake notification goes out, it processes that, has certain filters it puts it through before it decides it's newsworthy, right? And that's his news judgment written into code, right? And then if it's a newsworthy earthquake, according to the algorithm, this blog post, this map, all this automatically written, fed into the blog, email sent to the editor, get on it, right? I bet people in this room have covered earthquakes. Somebody has, probably, who doesn't work here. And what usually happens, right? What usually happens, either it hits the wire and you're like, oh shit, we missed it, right? Or somebody says, did you feel that? And then everybody is clicking around on the USGS website. Where is it? Where's that link? They have 18 versions. Which one? Is this one it? Fuck. Right? And in this case, in our case, that's Ron Lynn, right? That's for the LA Times people. But we don't need to do that anymore. The computer can do it. And Ron Lynn could work on his investigation into corruption at the Coliseum Commission and freaking make our city a better place to live. You know what I mean? And not worry about this stupid earthquake, right? Unless an earthquake hits the city, one that surpasses a certain barrier on your algorithm, right? So anyway, that's a cool example of that. We also build open source tools, right? We have a GitHub account. Who here is on GitHub? Right, so GitHub is like the social network for computer programmers. It's where you put your open source code up on there, and your friends can follow it, right? And when you make an update, you patch some code, they get a little Facebook update, right? And you can, it's true, it sounds, and it's awesome. So I don't know what's so funny. But like if you want to like learn to code or get into programming or have something better than a crappy PDF resume, I'd recommend that you put your code up on GitHub and share it with the world and, start participating in what is really a historic like thing in computer programming. And so we have a GitHub account and, we're not anything special, but we've got, 10 or 12 open source projects that are out there that we're, trying to build a community around. And this is just a couple examples. One is we have a framework for quickly making an interactive table. You want to search and sort and filter really simply a table on deadline. We've built a framework internally that can do that and open sourced it. It's called Table Stacker. It's being used by about a half dozen different newsrooms. This here on MinPost. Here we had Ken made a really great library, a wrapper on top of the AP's election data service, that like FTP that they dump everything on, that makes it really, really easy for you to write Python code to put the data out and put it up on your website. And after he did that, probably, 6 or 7 different news organizations have just stopped writing that same redundant code themselves and instead are using ours. And not only are they getting something out of it, they're contributing patches, fixes, and features to our code, so we don't have to do any work, and they're making our life easier, right? Okay, so that's the benefit, right? Another example is, this is a fun one. It's like autocomplete for address searches. It uses the Google geocoder as you type in an address. That's the LA Times address. It starts to suggest different places, right, which is kind of fun. But there's a lot of other ones if you go to github.com/datadesk. Okay, and Anthony, who's going to follow me up here, right? This is him on Twitter, Anthony J. Pesce, so follow him. He does a lot of different work here, but one thing that he focuses on and has really had a lot of success with is taking some of our print or less interactive graphic stuff and making it more interactive or more up to speed with the latest stuff on the web. And he's going to show you in depth one of those examples, but here's some other stuff that he's done. We have a template now to make a California counties map just using a spreadsheet. We just upload the spreadsheet, boom, we've got the map like in 10 or 15 minutes. The power of automation, right? These are maps we have to do a lot. Same thing for the U.S. states. He's made that. This is a recent one that he did for a Big Sunday package that's more custom. That's about the boulevards of Los Angeles. Our architecture critic is walking people through the major changes on them. And this sits on top of this big story he's written, which you can find where? What's the URL? LAtimes.com/boulevards. This just came out on Sunday. Right, we have templates now for doing these big, long graphics where you sort of have a little nav that changes as you scroll down and you can link to. And the template is done in a way so that the graphics staff, who couldn't build a page like this without some training, all they have to do is upload the images at a certain size, and boom, they've got a graphic like this. So since they've done this, since we introduced this template, they've probably done, a dozen of these? Right, and it takes graphics work that in many cases either would have been in print, appreciated by print readers, and then hated on the web because it was in a crappy template or just totally lost on the web, and puts it in a really just simple template that makes it like actually halfway enjoyable for the internet, more than halfway, Anthony, but yeah. And it's really been amazing to me to see the response on social media where it's just graphics that were in a sense routine for our really talented graphics artists that were just ignored online suddenly can have a lot of success on social media just because there's something to link to that people don't hate, right? And so like this particular graphic, this is of all the things we've done since I've been here, one of the things I'm most proud of is that William Gibson tweeted this graphic. The man who like freaking brought drones and science fiction together and like was way ahead of all this stuff. He loved this graphic, right? Which was by Raul, I think, down in the graphics department. Yeah. See, thank you, Will. Will works down there. And, you know, would William Gibson have seen it and tweeted it to his tens of thousands of really influential, like, tech followers if it hadn't been in something, you know, reasonably good? Also, Anthony did a lot of great work in getting live data out of Ken's data feed and into some interactive maps so that we were able to have live county-by-county results for all the GOP primaries, right? Anyway, so you should follow us, right? And here's where you can find us on the web. Our website, where we have our big projects and also a feed of our latest stuff, is at datadesk.latimes.com. You can follow us on Twitter at LAT Datadesk, which will have all that latest stuff as well. And you should get on GitHub if you're not already, and follow us at github.com/datadesk. That's about it. We consistently do have internships here at the LA Times, so if there's anyone who would be interested with that, in the last 3 or 4 years, we've had 3 data desk interns. Is that right? The first was Ken, who now works here. The second was Michelle Minkoff, who now works for the AP in D.C., right? And the third was Alan Vestal, who is either going to take a job or go to grad school. I haven't heard yet, but has been offered jobs. And so there's a lot of demand for this stuff. If you want to pick up some skills and get thrown in the deep end, we're happy to do it. And I promise you there'll be work for you somewhere when you come out the other side. So if you want to do that, apply with the GitHub account and talk to Dan Gaines, who's my supervisor, who I don't think is here, but his email is very small at the bottom. It's daniel.gaines@latimes.com, right? Or online jobs at latimes.com, says Tracy Boucher, who you could probably also bother after this meeting if you wanted to. And that's my whole talk. Does anybody have any questions before I hand it over to Anthony? Robert.
Can you take 2 seconds to talk about your Kickstarter project?
Okay, so outside of my work in the last few weeks, I launched a website which is called Past Pages. It is at pastpages.org. And it is essentially, let's see if we can fire it up here maybe. Let's run with scissors, as Sarah Cohen would call it. We're going to use the live web. And essentially every hour it goes through several dozen internet news site homepages and takes snapshots of them, where it will hopefully archive them forever. A lot of you are probably familiar with the Wayback Machine at archive.org, which is a really awesome site. However, it doesn't update often enough or regular enough to really do thorough study of what media is up to. And so the goal of this site is to really regularly capture as many media homepages as possible so that academics like Robert can have a great resource to study what happens on these pages over time. Like, what if you could do an academic study of every photo of Michelle Obama that was used by the media before this election, right? Or whatever, right? You can start thinking about different ways you can do it. Or when we have a financial collapse next year, how the Wall Street Journal decides to cover that, right? So it has an academic use. Second, I think it has a media criticism use. For instance, last week the Drudge Report posted a false story about how President Obama had fabricated things in his memoir. It was only up for several minutes and then it disappeared, but the screenshots on this site captured it. So if someone wanted to write a story pointing out that Matt Drudge likes to hype things that usually aren't true, they could use that as evidence. All right, so, and also, if you work at one of these news outlets and you just want to keep track of what's going on with your homepage over time, I hope it can be useful to you. This is an indie endeavor that I have funded out of my own pocket and built on my own time, but thanks to everybody on Twitter and other people in the awesome community of online geeks, I've raised $5,000 via Kickstarter to try to keep it alive. And so if you have any thoughts about what it ought to do or ought to be, or what I've screwed up with it, please feel free to tell me afterwards. It is pastpages.org. Any other questions? No. Okay. Well, with that, I'll hand it over to Anthony.
This is one of the more recent projects that I've worked on, and it is a sort of interactive web graphic for looking at how super PACs are spending their money in the primary race. Does everybody know what a super PAC is? So a political action committee is sort of supposedly independent organization that can spend money during a campaign, right? Super PACs, a result of a recent Supreme Court decision, can spend unlimited amounts of money called independent expenditures and can receive unlimited donations from interested parties. In many cases, super PACs are not supposed to be tied to a candidate or controlled by a candidate in any way. They're supposed to be independent, but many of these PACs are run by people who are friends and advisors and work with some of the candidates. So, we've tried to describe some of the super PAC activity happening in the selection using this graphic. Before I get into it too much, I wanted to show ProPublica has done some excellent work looking at super PACs also, both spending and contributors. And the New York Times has done some work on super PACs as well, looking at some of the top contributors, among other things. We took a look at some of this work and decided that we wanted to contribute something to the story about what was happening with super PACs in this election season. And we sort of sat in a meeting on a Friday afternoon and argued for about an hour, and sort of decided that, after looking at some of the data, and decided that what's probably going to be the most interesting story, or at least a very interesting story, is how are these candidates using affiliated but not affiliated PACs to spend money on other candidates? And we sort of discovered, I'll tell you right here, 56% of all of these expenditures have been spent opposing candidates. And you can see from looking at this graphic that Mitt Romney spent an exorbitant amount of money, almost $21 million opposing Santorum and almost $19 million opposing Newt Gingrich, and in large part knocked them out of the race. So you don't really get that looking here. You don't really get that looking here. And I think one of the key things we decided, both specifically about this graphic and in general about the kinds of presentations we want to do for a database, is it needs to tell a story. So for us, it was really important to have something that was quick and relatively digestible, where you could come here and see what was happening in a way that you couldn't if you just received sort of a dump of a database onto a web page. And you can dive in. We have a timeline where you can look at spending over time. So you can see Romney's really concerned about Newt Gingrich in January and February. Newt didn't do so well. Right? He starts contributing against Santorum. Most of these large jumps you see, by the way, are right before key state primaries. And then, okay, there goes Santorum, and lately now he's spending money on himself. Right? You can see very recently Obama has started spending some money against Romney. And we still have people like Herman Cain and Huntsman and Rick Perry here. But you can dive in. So it tells a story initially when you come to the page to look at it, and it allows you to sort of come in and explore and look at how the spending has evolved over the course of the primary season. Any questions so far? Okay. We also have a spreadsheet available of the biggest donors. Very, very wealthy and politically interested people who are contributing to one or more super PACs and in incredibly large amounts of money. This would not have been really possible before, or at least not like this. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we get and clean and process the data and store it in a database, and then I'm going to talk very briefly about some of the code that went into it. This is, we get all of our data from the FEC, the Federal Election Commission. If you come to this page, fec.gov/data/independentexpenditure.do, you can look at the latest filings, and this is updated, what, every day or two, Malloy?
It depends on the committee, but it's on a 24 or 48-hour cycle. They update these files. Each committee files a little bit differently.
So the FEC has kindly provided this interface where you can come and you can start to explore the data. And you can download it here with a CSV, as a CSV, which is what we do, which gets you this. Not a particularly handy format, although you can sort of see what they have, right? So there's a candidate name and some sort of ID and another ID, a state maybe, which office it is, how much money, the date. There's a lot of data here. It's somewhat indecipherable what's going on. So we wrote a program to come to this page, download the CSV, store it into a database, and from there, there's a little bit of a manual process for cleaning up the data that Malloy can talk more about. But essentially, the problem is when you come to this page and you download this spreadsheet, if you were to like do a sum on this expended amount on the spreadsheet, it wouldn't actually be accurate because you can amend an FEC filing. So if you file one report that says you spent $20 on advertising, you can come back and you can say, oops, I forgot a line item. I actually spent $20 here and $5 there. And that just gets inserted into the top of the spreadsheet with all of the new expenses and all of the old expenses. And you kind of have to manually go through and figure out what's what and what amended what. And that's this column, AMN_IND, right? And if it's an N, it means it has not been amended. And if it's an A1 or an A2, it means it has been. So you kind of have to figure out where these expenses line up. Malloy, do you want to come up for a sec?
Sure.
So Malloy is our fabulous researcher who spends her days toiling away doing this.
So go to the FEC. So the one thing you'll notice on this site, this is the FEC site where you can look at, this is an example of Associated Builders. And it's every day they file a report. And then they file quarterly or monthly depending on what cycle they're on. But you can see here that filing amended the one above it. So back in Anthony's database, what I have to do is I have to say, I want to keep the 77820, and I want to get rid of everything else. Because if I don't, then I'm going to do this double count. And there's not a nice way to do it, except manually look at the file, the spreadsheet, and look at those ID numbers, and then come back in here and get rid of the ones I don't want and keep the ones I do want. And it doesn't take a lot of time, but I have noticed before that I've not been careful. I thought, oh, I've gotten rid of everything, and then I'm like looking at things and I've forgotten to eliminate stuff. It goes by pretty quickly. You can do it in a pretty quick span of time. You can get rid of the things you don't need to have. So
this is sort of a peek at our admin for this site. It's powered by a database of all of these expenditures.
But the one thing back on this file that we're starting with, this is Super PACs working for the presidential campaign and congressional campaign too. So that's our next thing we're going to work on. We're going to look at how Super PACs are supporting congressional races in California.
But basically the workflow on something like this we've set up is I have this script that can go and fetch the spreadsheet from the FEC, look at everything, store it in our database, but we can't publish that live right away. You need to actually take a minute, look at the data, fix any of the amended filings, make sure, it passes the smell test, and then hit a publish button. So we have an interface where in this admin, you click a button and it pulls the data from the FEC. When the robot is finished loading it into the database, it emails me and Malloy. We see if there are any amended filings, if there are any new packs, if anything's really changed. It'll summarize this in the email. Malloy can come in, see all of the new amended filings, check them manually against this horrible thing on the FEC's website by searching for the identifier. Check a few boxes, make sure everything's kosher, hit publish, and then the graphic updates. So it's really important on something like this where you're relying on an external data source, that you have a robot going to download and process, that you actually do have a human who sort of sits there and looks at it and says, okay, everything looks good, everything's lining up, we're going to hit publish. I would strongly recommend that.
Other people have made mistakes. It's just a reminder that for all the stuff that you can do programmatically, you still need common sense and knowledge and thought, and so that we kind of joke around about how we say just push a button, but the truth is there's almost none of that. Almost nothing that we do is that simple. So
right.
It either required work on the front end, like Ken's earthquake program, to decide what was newsworthy and what should we exclude, or on this stuff, which is very complicated. Malloy has spent a long time really learning the political campaign process and brings a lot of knowledge to it. So, Ben kind of jokes about the robot reporters. The point is to take care of the busy work and reserve sort of the brain power for the stuff that really matters to produce the quality content out the other end.
Exactly. And so this is a sort of database view of that CSV I was showing you earlier. This is all of the information we get from the FEC. We have a separate admin where we can, for instance, tie a pack to a specific candidate. So we do all of that in the back, and then we hit go, and then it spits out this nice page that is actually powered by an extremely robust database that we've spent a great deal of time developing and cleaning and checking. Malloy and I have double and triple and quadruple checked the accuracy of all of this on at least a number of occasions. And we keep going back and doing it again. So we know it's good. And this is sort of how you would arrive at that. It's a Django database. This is a very simple pack model where it's the Sierra Club. They have their FEC unique identifier, and if we wanted to tie the Sierra Club to any one of these candidates, we could. For those of you who don't have the programming and research resources to build your own database, write scripts to automate pulling in FEC data, and have a researcher who has years and years of experience dealing with the FEC to go in and clean it up, the New York Times handily has a campaign finance API that actually ProPublica uses for this presentation. That if you want to start playing around with some of this campaign finance data, I would highly recommend it. I haven't spent a great deal of time in here myself, although I've talked to a couple of the developers who made it, and they are very smart people. And you can, for instance, come in and get a JSON list of the most recent expenditures that looks like this through the New York Times Campaign Finance API. You need an API key. I'm pretty sure anyone in this room could get one. And it's a very nice representation of the FEC data. I'm not positive the New York Times cleans it up in the same way that we do, although I would imagine that they do. Probably something to look into if you're interested in using it. On the front end, so I talked about the database and stuff. On the front end, this is all just JavaScript. So for those of you who know a little bit of HTML, there's actually not a lot of fancy stuff going on. This is just a table. It's an HTML table. which is handy because, you're dealing with a graphic that it has huge sums of money that are changing and growing every single day. And you have this like oppose column on one side and a support column on the other side, and you need to make sure that everything is fitting into 980 pixels and that the bars are all sized appropriately for the space you have and the amount of money they're supposed to represent. Django, which is the software we use sort of on the back end to develop this, has some very handy features that you can apply on the template that will automatically resize your divs based on a value and a maximum width, right? So in this case, the maximum width is 980 pixels and your value is $20 million, and then your maximum value is $33 million, $34 million. So like the pixels on the div are actually completely representative of the amount of money that they're supposed to have, and everything sizes automatically. And all of that is sort of handled for me. The table adjusts automatically if more falls into the oppose or the support, because an HTML table is just built that way. The divs all size appropriately because we have some code on the back end and a full-featured piece of software to sort of handle that for us. And then, how many of you have heard of jQuery? Right, so if you don't know JavaScript or don't have a lot of front-end development experience, you can actually sort of get a long way using jQuery. Like this, this was a feature we added later, but we have the date picker and slider. Somebody had written a jQuery plugin for a slider by date range, or not by date range, just for a slider, right? And I went in and I lightly modified it to accommodate what I needed, and in less than a day's work, it was working for my specific application, right? So chances are, if you have a feature in mind or you want to sort of accomplish something technically, someone has already kind of done a lot of the work for you and open sourced it, and that was true here. So my focus here was writing some JavaScript to handle the math to sort of adjust all of these numbers and adjust the different sizes of the bars and the divs to accommodate the slide, but I didn't actually have to code the slider from scratch. So I got to focus on the actual problem, which was the math, and making sure everything was adjusted, and like the numbers in these tooltips update as you drag it, like, making sure all of that worked as I wanted it to, and tested that, and not so much worry about the rest. We have some code on the back end also that takes all of these different FEC expenditures and transactions we have stored in the database. It sort of looks at all of them in aggregate, does some math, and spits out a JSON feed onto this page that we then use to render the graphic. Does anybody know what JSON is? Okay, it's a way of sort of serializing your data so that it comes out in a structured, easy-to-use way on the front end. Much like this, right? So instead of some crazy, like FEC spreadsheet, you actually sort of see the breakdown of the data, and it's easy for you to come in and programmatically access and process. So that probably just about does it in terms of this presentation. I'm happy to answer questions about it or to show off some other stuff we've been doing with elections lately.
Just the qualifying if an ad is definitively opposing one candidate or supporting another candidate, because some ads do definitely kind of split, even though the 30 seconds kind of split the time. Is that an editorial decision I assume the FEC makes?
Luckily, that is not a call we make, right? So the FEC in their filing requirements makes them pick, right? So they have this neat column in their spreadsheet, support or oppose, and that comes over to us automatically. Otherwise, it would be a nightmare. Like, there would be literally no way. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I mean, maybe you could game the system by faking some of your FEC filings, although I doubt it. So the colors are key. The colors are keyed to the candidate. So this is Romney. This is Santorum. This is Mr. Gingrich.
I mean, a bunch of us laugh because, I mean, colors are a horrifying job to pick for online. You've got Anthony, God bless him, is colorblind, so he's our special needs case on the data team. It's one of the reasons we kept him. He actually started as an intern on the homicide report, which he did not mention, so and has taught himself, most if not all of his code. So early on, when we had a large number of Republican candidates who were getting votes, we had to choose colors that would read easily online and not be flipped. Sorry, I was saying that early on, when we had a lot of Republican candidates still in the race, we were faced with finding enough colors that were distinct and yet not political, in order to display them. So for instance, and we went, believe me, this was through the ringer on this. This could be a whole ONA presentation on its own. But, for instance, you can't give Romney red. I mean, that indicates that you think he's going to win eventually, even if you did think that. It's so we went through a lot of different incarnations. So all this this was trying for consistency throughout our presentation. So as we were presenting the live election nights, live election results on primary nights, we wanted to make sure that throughout our whole presentation of the primaries and then into the general that we were consistent with colors. Of course, as we switch into the general, if Romney does in fact become the nominee at the convention and Obama is the nominee, then we go into much more traditional red and blue colors. But we have a whole. I mean, is this the prettiest map we could have made? No, but can you understand who got which votes? And there's all sorts of things too. There's this whole debate: can we give Bachmann pink? We had to switch that. You can make her pink. And then you were right. So it was a big debate. But that's what it is. It's basically trying to be consistent from here throughout the rest of the products that we created for the campaign. I can tell there's probably other people in the room who have faced this problem. It's very, very fun.
Any other questions?
I'm wondering how many LA Times journalists source this data, and also if you've seen other journalists at organizations sourcing this data too.
All right, so the question is how many LA Times journalists are sourcing this data and what other organizations are doing the same thing. How many of us work on it? On elections or super PACs in
If a political blogger is writing a story, do they use this data in their article?
Yeah, we actually field requests from reporters and our DC bureau on a fairly regular basis, particularly with campaign finance. Malloy does a lot of that. Doug Smith and Sandra Poindexter also do a lot of that. I sort of have the keys to the database on the super PAC expenditures, so I help out from time to time when there's a super PAC specific question. So the number of people who are looking at and cleaning up and analyzing this kind of data, 5 or 6 maybe, including Malloy, Doug Smith, Sandy Poindexter, and then Ken and me and Ben. Other organizations, the New York Times is doing it. Open Secrets does it. Anyone else?
I'm sure there's other papers. I think a lot of organizations are trying to do it because we all know that the kind of money that's going to be spent during this campaign cycle by super PACs is kind of hard to wrap your head around. I mean, they're already very close to $100 million. And that's not even talking about what the candidate committees themselves will spend. So there's going to be a lot of money spent. So our goal here was to try and give people an idea of how much money is being spent and how it is being spent. And you can see in this example here that Romney spent, the PACs affiliated with Romney or in support of him spent a lot of money to get rid of Santorum and Gingrich. I mean, a it was fascinating to watch with the timeline. You could see a moment in time when all of a sudden Romney turned his attention to Santorum. He no longer cared about Gingrich, and you could just, we could watch it, and we got our DC bureau. We were like, you guys got to write a post. You know, you could just see this moment in time where it was very clear that there had been a shift, and that Gingrich was no longer the threat. And for that, it's been really useful. I think it's a good tool to try and explain how this campaign is going to play out with super PAC money. So that was kind of, you know, our motivation in using it. I think a lot of other organizations are trying to use super PACs to tell the story and do it in different ways.
Can you talk about, if you remember, what came first, if you will, in terms of the front-end design, when you knew that the story was about spending on opposed stuff, or did you go through the data first and then say, this is a story we're going to tell, then you build the front-end? Does that make sense?
It does, and it was a lot of both. So we had looked at what some of our competitors were doing. We looked at ProPublica, we looked at NYT, Open Secrets, a couple other people, and sort of saw what they had done. It's, in some cases, a little bit difficult to come here and quickly process what's happening. So we knew we wanted to tell a story, right? We didn't want to have a sort of data dump that a reader or a viewer would have to come in and sort of sift through in order to figure out. Oh, right. So right, we have this philosophy like, you know, we don't have as many resources as some of the other news organizations out there. We're a small team, 3 developers, you know, 3 people who analyze and play with data. We can't do everything and be everything all the time. So a lot of the times we want to try and focus on one really great thing, one really great part of the data that we can show off, one really great interactive or feature that we can do and do really well, rather than doing the whole thing. Like you know, in this case, ProPublica has this really great tree map of the biggest donors that we would very much like to do, but have not gotten around to yet. This is another example of something like that, where we just launched this recently. You know, the idea here was we wanted to give people information about what states were considered at play in the election. So we have our wonderful DC Bureau wrote a very informative blurb about each state, and we've made editorial selections about which states are considered battleground states that the reader can come in and turn either Obama or Romney to see what the results could be. You know, and the Huffington Post and the New York Times and other news organizations have done a lot more with this kind of data. We wanted to make something that was both informative and fun, something that focused you on what was really the story, what was really going on, rather than giving you a ton of different options and sort of overwhelming the user. But, you know, so our philosophy on super PACs was, let's tell a story. Let's come in and find a unique way of presenting the data and telling the best story about what was interesting. So we looked at what our competitors had done. We looked at the raw data. We sat around a table for a long time, sort of batting back and forth different ways of presenting it and different things to break it down by. And a lot of it was dictated by what the FEC gave us, right? So they gave us support and oppose. We knew pretty well which PACs were affiliated with each candidate. And we decided we want to look at how those PACs were spending on other candidates. And you kind of had an idea at the outset that it would probably be a lot of negative. And it was. And, you come to this page and you immediately see that Romney has just spent exorbitant amounts of money opposing Santorum and Gingrich. And this this kind of storytelling is what we were after. So it was, a combination of what's the best way of presenting the data, what do we have already that's available, and what looking at it do we think is interesting or is going to be interesting, both if the raw data already and just sort of knowing, having that knowledge of what we thought was probably going to happen.
I'm just wondering, from conception to completion, how much time, how many people were required for the project?
That's a good question. So the question is from the first idea to launch, basically, how much time and resources and people were required for the project. I did pretty much all of the coding, front and back. Malloy did a tremendous amount of work initially cleaning up all of the FEC data, and continually, every single day, every time we update it, is coming in and doing work to clean up the filings. A few weeks. So it was a pretty quick turnaround, considering.
You talk about, you said you were self-taught. What are some early tools you use, or some, advice people want to do that after?
Sure. Yeah, I decided to learn to code because I wanted a job. I came here as an intern, and I was a web intern, and I got lucky enough to be placed with Megan on the data team, writing. This is on camera. I was lucky enough to be placed with Megan Garvey as an intern. And sort of looked at Ben and looked at Ken when he came in as an intern also, and sort of figured, the company's bankrupt. They're not going to hire me unless I have seriously marketable skills, right? So I worked on the skills. I started off, I sort of already knew a little bit of HTML, no JavaScript. So I polished my HTML skills, picked up jQuery. From there, learned more JavaScript. Through books. Books and websites like W3 Schools is really good for HTML in particular. And then from there, learned Python and then Django.
How long ago was that?
2 years. 3 years. Something in there.
When did you graduate?
09. Yeah. Since 2009. Takes a while. Yes.
So, once you have this out there, is it fully conceived when it arrives, or is there any time when you go back and you decide, we're getting so much play on this, we're going to add features, we're going to expand this story?
Absolutely. I think it's pretty rare that we launch a fully baked product right off the bat. And we're trying to sort of get away from that attitude as well. But no, this it launched sort of as a more static version of this. The date range picker and slider was not here, but
You couldn't.
this stuff was. Huh?
So talk about being able to highlight an individual candidate's contributions. That was something that was added later based on.
Oh, right. This right. The sort of rollover where you could see a candidate get highlighted on it was added later. The date range slider was added later, but it launched looking a lot like this.
And we'd like to add, it'd be nice to see the events that precipitated some of the spending. So like the South Carolina primary, or your Gingrich winning South Carolina, or Santorum dropping out of the race. You've got some space issues. Anthony actually cleaned that up earlier today, so the timeline. So I think it's always a work in progress. I'm never done.
And the other thing is we have this great database now of all of these expenditures and super PACs, and we have one page, right, which is great, but it'd be nice if we had detail pages on each PAC. It'd be nice if we could do a little bit more and tell a few more stories with the enormous amount of data we have and the great database we have from the FEC. So certainly there's a plan to do more. What it's going to be yet is still a little bit up in the air, but this was an evolution, and then there will be more with the data later after the California primary, probably. Yes?
What is the
We've gotten some great response on this. Apparently not a lot of comments, but like this map though, there are so many comments. It's really but stuff like this does well. And I sit next to our homepage producers and can badger them to link to more interactive and database-driven work that we're doing. And we regularly are sending emails to all of our bloggers and reporters in DC to get stuff linked up that we do on their posts. So, it's an ongoing effort to get even our stuff promoted across the website in the way that it should be. But when people do find it, it does really well, and people spend a lot of time on these pages, and they do well on their own, just in terms of page views.
They have a much longer half-life than a story. The story's going to get 99% of its views in the first, few hours. In many cases. Something like this can be linked to political stories for months and months and months.
And then I actually have one more question. I know that this is a lot more interactive, but considering that LA Times still has the print version, do we use stuff like this more than actual printed?
Sorry. So the question is about how much of the work that we do makes it back into print. And Ben showed a couple examples early on of that where, does this precise graphic make it into print? This has not yet. There might be other examples where it has. But I think that we've really worked to try to do more, to inform more of print by some of the web work that we're doing and not be so dictated by what we would do for print anyway. So that's definitely like a struggle that has gone on. And the thing is like what Ben was saying, like where there's a longer half-life, where this stuff lives on, where this stuff, we're going to eventually boil this down to Romney and Obama, and it'll change in that sense because the whole focus of what's going on in the news right now is about to change significantly as we look forward to November. But yeah, that's definitely something that I think as an organization we're trying to think more creatively and think differently about how we produce the news so that the online stuff doesn't just stay online and the print stuff doesn't just stay in print, that there's much more communication back and forth. And I think Martin is ready to come up and bid you farewell.
Thank you, Anthony, very much. And we're going to wrap up. We're going to put the screen up. We're going to open the bar again. And I just want to thank you again for coming and join the ONA. I know I will eventually, someday. Thank you, Julie, for all your for the idea of this and for convincing us to do it. We had a good time and hope you all did too. And we'll be around. Pinhole us, talk to us, follow us on Twitter, and so on. But thank you very much for coming.